Two people earn the same money, in the same town, with the same rent. After 10 years, one has savings and the other does not, and neither of them can tell you exactly where the difference went. The thing that best predicts which one is which, in the research, is not income and it is not financial knowledge. It is a belief that got a name back in 1966. The belief is about where you think outcomes come from. Some people read the events of their life as mostly following from what they did. They got the job because they prepared. They lost the client because they let the follow-up slide. Psychologists call that an internal locus of control. Other people read the same kinds of events as mostly following from things outside them. Luck, timing, the economy, the boss, the way things are. That is an external locus of control. A psychologist named Julian Rotter put a name and a scale on that in 1966, and the idea has been running through psychology and economics ever since. Before I go further, I want to say the thing that most videos on this topic skip. Because if I do not say it now, the rest of this will sound like a lecture from somebody who has never had a hard year. For a great many people, the external reading is simply accurate. If your hours get cut without notice, if a diagnosis arrives, if you are carrying a parent and a child at the same time, if the rent goes up faster than anything you can do about it, then reading your outcomes as coming from outside you is not a distortion. It is observation. Nobody thinks their way out of an actual shortage, and I am not going to sit here and suggest otherwise. So this episode is not about telling anybody that their circumstances are in their head. It is about something narrower and, I think, more useful. Let me get to the research, because it is more careful than the internet version of it. In 2016, 3 economists, Cobb, Clark, Deneau, and Sinning, published a study called Locus of Control and Savings in the Journal of Banking and Finance, Volume 73, pages 113 to 130. They looked at household savings against where the household's reference person sat on that internal to external scale. Here is what they found. Households with an internal reference person saved more. Not just more dollars, which you might expect if internal people happen to earn more, but more as a percentage of permanent income. So the gap survives when you account for how much is coming in. Then, it gets more interesting, and this is the part I have not seen anybody quote. The gap in savings RATS was largest among rich households, but the gap in WEAth accumulation was largest among poor households. Sit with that pairing for a second, because those two sentences are pulling in different directions and they explain something real. Among people with money left over at the end of the month, this belief shows up in what percentage they choose to put away. Among people without much room, it shows up in whether anything accumulates at all. Which is to say, the belief matters most, in absolute terms, exactly where the margin is thinnest, and one more finding, because it is oddly specific. Households with an internal reference person and average net worth held significantly less financial wealth, but significantly more pension wealth than otherwise similar external households. Less in the ordinary accounts, more in the retirement accounts, same people. That is a portfolio difference, not just a savings amount difference, and it points at something about time horizon that I will come back to. Now the caveat said plainly, because I promised you the careful version. That study shows an association. It does not prove that the belief causes the saving. And the reverse story is perfectly plausible. Somebody who has managed to build a cushion has a lot of evidence that their actions produce results, which would make them read the world as more controllable. Money can build the belief just as easily as the belief builds money. Most likely it runs both directions and feeds itself, which is exactly what makes it interesting, and exactly why the first turn of the wheel matters so much. So let us talk about that first turn, and about what this actually looks like on a Tuesday, because none of this arrives labeled. Nobody says out loud, I have an external locus of control. It comes out in sentences that sound completely ordinary. It comes out as, there is no point putting $50 away, that is nothing. It comes out as, I will start saving when things settle down. It comes out as, those people had help. It comes out as, whatever I do, something always comes up. And here is the honest part. Every one of those 4 sentences is sometimes TRU. $50 is a small amount. Things really are unsettled. Plenty of wealthy people did have help. And for some households, something genuinely does always come up. The question is not whether the sentence is accurate. The question is what the sentence is DOIing. Because each one closes an action, and it closes the action before anybody tested it. So here's the move I want to give you, and it is not believe you control your life, because that is not a thing you can decide to believe at 8 in the morning. The move is to shrink the frame. Take whatever the money question is, and keep cutting it down until you reach the piece that is yours. Not the whole thing, the piece. You cannot control what the rent does next year. You might control whether the renewal letter gets opened the day it arrives instead of 3 weeks later. You cannot control whether the car breaks. You might control whether there is $200 in a separate account when it does. You cannot control the interest rate on the card. You might control whether you call and ask, which works often enough to be worth the 10 minutes and almost nobody does. You cannot control the job market. You might control whether one person who could hire you knows your name by Friday. Every one of those is small. That is the point. An internal locus is not a belief that you control everything. Looked at closely, it is a habit of noticing the part that responds. And that pension finding suggests something about why it compounds. Money in a retirement account is money you cannot touch easily, which means putting it there is a bet that a future version of you exists and is worth funding. That is the same belief in a different costume. The person who saves into a plan they cannot raid is expressing an opinion about whether tomorrow is real. Let me give you two people, because this stops being abstract when it has faces. Marcus and Dee both work at the same distribution center. Same shift, same pay grade, both single, both renting in the same complex. Marcus reads his money the way most of us were taught to. It is mostly out of his hands. The bills arrive, the money leaves, and what is left is what the month decided. When his hours got cut in the spring, that was the boss. When he got a small bonus in the summer, that was luck. Neither event changed what he did next, because in his reading of things, nothing he does moves the needle much anyway. Dee reads the same paycheck differently, not because she is more optimistic, but because she keeps looking for the lever. When her hours got cut, she went and asked the scheduler what determined the assignments, and it turned out to be a certification that took 6 weeks to get. She has $40 a week going into an account she does not have a card for. When the bonus came, she did not celebrate it, she moved it before the weekend. After 3 years, Dee has about $6,000 and a certification. Marcus has the same job and no cushion. Now here is the part I do not want you to miss, because this is where these stories usually turn preachy and wrong. Dee did not work harder than Marcus. She was not smarter. She was not more disciplined in the way people mean when they say that word. She just kept asking a smaller question. Not how do I fix my finances, which is a question with no handle on it, but what part of this responds to me? And if you gave Marcus a genuinely uncontrollable year, a health crisis, a parent needing care, Dee's approach would not have saved him either. The lever is not always there. This is not a morality tale about effort. It is about where you point your attention when a lever WS exists, and the research suggests that where you point it has a lot to do with whether you believe pointing matters. So, 3 things to actually do with this, and then I will let you go. 1. For the next week, catch the sentences, not to judge them. Just notice how often the words that end an option are the words you say most easily. Whatever I do, something always comes up. There is no point. I will start when. You are looking for the moment a door closes without anybody trying the handle. 2. Pick one thing this week that is small enough to be boring and entirely inside your control. Open the letter, make the call, move the $40. Ask the question at work that you have been meaning to ask. The size does not matter at all. What matters is that you get one clean piece of evidence generated by you that an action produced a result. 3. Put the next bit of money somewhere you cannot easily reach. That pension finding was not an accident. A place you cannot raid is a vote for the future version of you, and unlike a feeling, it keeps voting whether or not you feel like it that month. That is the whole episode. The belief is not a personality you are stuck with. It is closer to a muscle that responds to evidence. And evidence is something you can manufacture on purpose, in amount small enough that nobody would be impressed. Nobody is going to be impressed by $40 a week. 3 years from now, the balance will not care whether anybody was impressed. One more thought before I go, because there is an objection sitting in the room and it deserves an answer. Somebody watching this is thinking, this is just the old bootstrap speech with a citation attached. I have heard it. It is aimed at people like me, and it is convenient for everybody who has never been broke. That objection is fair, and I want to meet it directly rather than talk around it. Here is the difference, as I see it. The bootstraps version says your circumstances are your fault. Nothing in that study says anything of the kind, and I am not saying it either. What the research actually observed is that among people in similar circumstances, the ones who kept looking for the responsive part ended up with more. Similar circumstances. That phrase is doing a lot of work, and it is the honest part of the finding. And notice which direction the wealth gap ran. The largest gap in accumulation showed up among poor households, not rich ones. You could read that as blame. I read it as the opposite. It says, the small levers matter most for the people with the least room, which is precisely the group that gets told most often that nothing they do matters. Being told that, over and over, by everybody from a landlord to a headline, is itself a way of learning the external reading, So if this lands as one more voice telling you to try harder, ignore me. That is not the point, and it is not what the numbers say. The point is smaller and quieter. Somewhere in a week that you did not design and did not choose, there is usually one thing that answers back. Finding that thing is a skill, not a virtue, and skills improve with repetition rather than with character. I will leave you with the question I use on myself when a month has gone sideways and everything feels decided by somebody else. Not, what should I have done differently, which is a question that only produces regret. Just, what is the smallest thing here that would respond to me? Some weeks, the answer is a phone call. Some weeks it is $40. Some weeks, honestly, the answer is nothing, and the right move is to stop looking and get through the week. But asking is free, and the answer is not nothing nearly as often as it feels. I am Sam. Thanks for spending this time with me, and I will see you in the next one.